Hi everyone, it's me Giovanni again, and today is of course about the Fnaf 4 and Midnight Motorist soft story again, part 5. So, there was someone who tried to solve Midnight Motorist, but their ending conclusion was so ridiculous that I just need to bring this up. Oh, and also I need a recap of the timeline. To tell you the recap of the timeline, okay. So apparently there's some YouTuber who I did not want to see again. Especially since I don't know some of the other people that have been recommended towards me. So I just decided to ignore them because why? Just why? So this YouTuber says that Mrs. Afton is actually the orange person, and that she comes home drunk, and for some reason she's abusive, and William Afton is actually the person on the couch. And Elizabeth Afton's grave is in that field in that pile of grass and dirt. But it doesn't really make any sense, because why is Mrs. Afton the orange person when she's not even supposed to be important to the story, at all? The only confirmation we get of her being a character is the staff robot of her in Security Breach, in the sticky note room, above the sticky note room, the character of Clara in The Immortal and the Restless, the sort of soap opera that Michael watches at the end of his shift during Sister Location. And finally, the one thing that someone has managed to solve is the person on the couch watching TV. Now it's off. I can already tell that the person sitting on the couch isn't at all Michael, because okay, so Sister Location pretty much takes place after William Afton gets spring locked, after William Afton's supposed death. So Midnight Motorist pretty much takes place the day after after William kills Charlie, Henry's daughter. So William Afton comes home later that night, which Midnight Motorist says in the game files. William Afton comes home. His wife is sitting on the couch. He tells William to not bother Michael because he had a rough day, probably at school. William doesn't listen. He's probably still drunk, even when he murdered Charlie, because he goes outside. When he doesn't get a response, he goes outside and notices that he's probably ran off to some place again. He doesn't question about the footprints or the pile of dirt or grass, because the pile of dirt is Evan's grave, and the footprints, well, I pretty much concluded that it wouldn't be Nightmare Fredbear, because he was a recent dream that Michael had that Cassidy brought up. So my guess would have been Shadow Freddy, because Shadow Freddy was created by the agony, fear, and evil that William caused. Or my guess is that most people speculate that the Crying Child turned into Shadow Freddy, but Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie are just random entities created via agony and evil. And Nightmare, the ghostly hallucination, black version of Fredbear, it's actually just Shadow Freddy. And considering that Michael has nightmares about, in Didophobia, it might be speculated that Michael had nightmares about the experiments, and at night 7, Michael's experiencing experiencing them, has nightmares of them with Nightmare and Nightmare Fredbear in there. Okay, let me just give you a recap. So, Fnaf 4 takes place in 1983. Well, not exactly the nights, but the minigames. So, the crying child is killed by Fredbear via his brother playing a cruel prank on him with his friends. William Afton goes into a mad spiral. He kills his friend Henry's daughter Charlie due to jealousy and anger. Especially since during that time, especially on Halloween, after William kills Charlie, mostly because he was also drunk, they're still going through a divorce, and William comes home. Well, in my Midnight Motorist, there's a minigame where it involves a pink car going through other cars and trying to make it to the finish line. I'm guessing that William had a long drive home after killing Charlie because, well, actually, no, that's not what happened. So, William drives home. His wife tells him not to bother Michael because he had a rough day, probably at school. William doesn't listen. He bangs on the door, telling Michael that he told him to not lock the door, and tells him to open it. He doesn't get a response. So, annoyed, he goes outside and notices that Michael has ran away and that the window is broken. And William says he might have ran off to that place again. Probably the crying child's grave, because there's a patch of grass and dirt at an unknown grass area near the forest. There's also footprints near looking at the window, but William doesn't question it, especially since he's drunk. It's obvious that he wouldn't be there watching Michael through the window because, let's be honest, there's no way that he would just bring his spring bodysuit home with him. That would be impossible. And even though there's clearly footprints there, it was made by an illusional ghost or something. Possibly, my theory is Shadow Freddy. In 1985, William and his wife get a divorce. William manipulates his children in order to get custody of them, and it worked. In 1985, he murders 5 children: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. Susie was the first victim of the missing children, and pretty much seen everything, even with Charlie. He notices remnant and decides to experiment. In 1986, he creates Circus Baby's Pete's World and creates the Funtime animatronics to kidnap children. His daughter Elizabeth dies from Circus Baby, but he continues to do the experiments by kidnapping children and taking them to other experiments inside the bunker in separate rooms, connected to the bunker, being which the Fnaf 4 bedroom, which is sort of recreating his youngest son's fears, and another room involving a game with Plush Trap. Multiple kids died from these experiments 10 years later, but one kid survived, being Roy. And Roy was kidnapped on his 7th birthday 10 years ago, and he's now 17. My guess is that Roy's experience finding out about the experiment happens before Sister Location. Um, and and my guess that it takes place the same year during Sister Location, but Sister Location doesn't happen yet, so I'm guessing it takes like days or weeks. I'm guessing weeks, because Roy is probably still in there, and just William Afton abandoned the experiments when he got enough remnant and just left it on auto mode. And he gets spring locked in 1995, when, after Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria closed down 2 years before, in 1993. His son Michael goes into the circus Sister Location in 1996, right after Roy found out about the experiments, but decides to continue from a cassette tape that William left on auto. After Michael gets scooped, remnant is ejected into him, and he has nightmares about the experiment from what happened to the other kids, and he has a nightmare about Nightmare Fredbear, and that's and it's probably the main catalyst why he gets a job at Fazbear's Frights. In my version of the timeline, it takes place in 2013. Meanwhile, in the canon version of events, it takes place in 2023. But in my opinion, 30 years, taking place 30 years later after Fnaf 1 is pretty much a really long time. So 20 years might be a little more simpler. I don't know, I just think it's much more easier to have it take place 20 years, because 30 years is pretty much a long time, even though we're in that year today, but I'm just saying that it might take place in 2013 instead. Deal with it. And like I said about Midnight Motorist, involves a certain family, a drunk father, a sort of out-of-touch mother, and a runaway kid. Meanwhile, in the background, in the actual setting, it might involve a random family, but it actually involves the Aftons. It's just reflecting what happened to them after Charlie's death. Like, the actual family in my Midnight Motorist and the certain things that happened are reflecting what actually happened to the Aftons during the year 1983, after William kills Charlie. There was also something about Midnight Motorist taking place during William Afton's childhood, and I do like that, but it pretty much doesn't make any sense either. Because, why? But then again, I did have this sort of concept where we get a glimpse of William Afton's childhood, and that he was, or Purple Guy's childhood, and that he was abused by his father. So, maybe, but no, definitely not. But Purple Guy being abused by his father? I agree. Anyways, that's all. Sorry about this video being rushed. Bye.